You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 17th of July 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
The job for me now is not to say that who is good, who is bad. The situation is obvious. Putin and Russia started the invasion against Ukraine. But my duty is to concentrate on how we can create peace.
That's Hungary's Viktor Orbán, but the EU says his so-called peace mission is unauthorised by the bloc, of which he is the current rotating president. We'll unpick that story for you. Then...
It looks like a convention, it sounds like a convention, but this is not a traditional Republican convention.
Looks more like a coronation. We'll join Simon Marks at the RNC in Milwaukee. France's government has resigned, but the Left Alliance, which came out on top in the snap election, can't agree on a way forward. We'll have analysis from Paris. We'll look ahead to the King's speech in Britain, where the new Labour government will set out its agenda. We'll browse the front pages, have an architecture roundup, and then we'll head to Brazil to find out more about the new culture minister, music legend Margareth Menezes. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Israeli forces battled Hamas-led fighters in several parts of the Gaza Strip on Tuesday, and Palestinian health officials said at least 57 people were killed in Israeli bombardments of southern and central areas. China and Russia have begun live-fire naval exercises in the South China Sea, according to a state-controlled newspaper, with the two countries having strengthened military and trade ties in recent years following US sanctions on both. And Thai police are investigating the deaths of 6 foreign nationals, whose bodies were found in a room at an upmarket hotel in Bangkok on Tuesday, including looking for a 7th person in connection with the incident. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. In July, Hungary took over the rotating EU presidency and, since assuming the role, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has undertaken what he calls peace missions, visiting Kyiv, Moscow, Beijing and Washington, claiming to be representing the European Union. The European Commission, however, says that Budapest's cavalier use of the EU presidency is unacceptable and is now making that displeasure apparent. Well, I'm joined by Justin Spike, who's Associated Press's Hungary correspondent. Justin, good to have you back on the show. Just what has Viktor Orbán been up to?
Thank you. Yes, very shortly after Hungary took over the rotating presidency of the EU on the 1st of July, Orbán set out on these unannounced trips, first going to Kyiv to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky, which pleased a lot of his partners in the EU, in fact, because he hadn't been to Ukraine since the war began more than 2 years ago. However, a couple of days later, he went to meet with Vladimir Putin in Moscow, and then traveled to Azerbaijan, and then traveled to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping. And then, of course, as you mentioned, he met with Donald Trump last week. Now, the reason that that's concerned a lot of his partners in the EU is because they had not been informed ahead of time about these visits, and they really worried that it was giving the impression that he was working or acting on behalf in a diplomatic fashion of the EU. Now, we all know that European leaders have avoided meeting in person with Putin since he launched his invasion of Ukraine, and so EU leaders decided they're going to try to put pressure on Orbán by perhaps boycotting or drawing down participation in some of the presidency-related meetings that Hungary will be hosting in the next 6 months.
So basically, they've said that they're not going to turn up, or they're having rival meetings at the same time.
Correct. For example, yesterday there was a meeting of energy ministers in Budapest, but quite a few EU member states neglected to send their ministers, instead sending lower-level civil servants as a sort of act of protest. Now, a number of countries did send their energy ministers, so not all EU countries are as yet on board with this act of protest. However, the European Commission did indicate that it would ask all of its commissioners not to attend these informal meetings in Budapest, and Joseph Borrell, the EU's top diplomat, it appears is considering having his own meeting of the bloc's foreign ministers on the same day at the end of August that Hungary is planning the same kind of meeting in Budapest.
So how's Hungary reacted?
So members of fellow members of Orbán's Fidesz party have reacted in a way which is by now pretty familiar when it comes to their kind of bellicose rhetoric concerning the EU. They're saying it's blackmail, it's political pressure, it's just political bias against Hungary. And they've kind of reacted with outrage that, here we are trying to make peace, but all of you pro-war politicians out there are chastising and ostracizing us for trying to make peace.
Now, there was a leaked letter from Orbán to the EU. It was talking about Donald Trump and the Russian war against Ukraine. What was he saying in that?
That letter has not been formally made public, but reporting shows that he indicates that Putin really believes that time is on Russia's side and not on Ukraine's side. That Putin is open to peace negotiations, but only based on frameworks of earlier negotiations that had begun only a couple of months after the war started, and also his belief that Donald Trump would very quickly, even before he took office, even before his inauguration, would work to bring the war to an end in the case of his election.
So I wonder what else the EU can do and how much power Hungary has in this situation. I mean, could it in fact be expelled from the Union?
I don't see that as likely. That would be an unprecedented move, and Orbán's relationship with the EU has been fraught for many years, but always he's managed to kind of walk up to the line without stepping over it. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a red line. But the EU can't really act in concert. Let's not forget that it's a bloc made up of member states, and the council is made up of the heads of government of all the countries. And Orbán does have some, albeit few, but a couple of fans across the EU. So I don't see Hungary coming out of the European Union, but similar censure as we saw with the European Commission boycotting meetings in Hungary. I think that's certainly a possibility.
And I wonder if this is going to affect the European political community, the EPC meeting at Blenheim Palace in Britain this week.
I haven't seen any reports about that. It's a distinct possibility. The situation's quite fluid. It seems like day after day, we're seeing new steps from new areas of the European Union in reaction to Orbán's so-called peace missions. For example, yesterday, a letter was released, sent by 63 members of the European Parliament to EU top officials, asking to strip Hungary of its voting rights in the bloc under the Article 7 procedure. Now, again, that's not the first time that that's happened, and it's unlikely that it will happen, that Hungary will be stripped of its voting rights. But one can see that there are a lot within the bloc who are unhappy with Orbán and his conduct and are looking for ways to try to bring him back into the mainstream.
And I wonder what the people of Hungary feel. I mean, how is it being reported there? Do citizens have strong feelings about being close to the EU?
Hungarians continue to be very pro-EU, amongst the most pro-EU in Europe, despite a lot of the media communication in Hungary suggesting that the root of most of our problems is coming from Brussels. I think that Orbán's ostensible search for peace or for an end to the war in Ukraine is popular amongst Hungarians, and they would like to see the two warring parties sit down at the negotiating table. Orbán has not articulated what such a deal might mean for Ukraine's future peace and security. But I think Hungarians, being a neighboring country to Ukraine, would like to see that happen. But as far as the EU is concerned, they remain pro-EU. And I think a lot of Hungarians feel proud that Hungary is in the headlines. It's a small country of 10 million people in Central Europe, but they've got their prime minister meeting with Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping in the headlines all over the world. So, Orbán is always punching above his weight, and I think a lot of Hungarians appreciate that.
Justin, thank you very much indeed. That's Justin Spike there. And this is The Globalist. The Republican convention in Milwaukee is entering its third day, with Senator J.D. Vance the headline speaker at tonight's session. Donald Trump's running mate will grab his opportunity to address the Republican faithful for the first time since his nomination, and will also seek to introduce himself to a vast television and internet audience watching him from coast to coast. Republicans gave a hero's welcome to Donald Trump himself on Monday night, seeing him for the first time since he survived last weekend's assassination attempt in Pennsylvania. And reporter Simon Marks in Milwaukee says that the party is feeling increasingly confident that, with President Joe Biden still facing calls for him to quit the race, Republicans are on course for victory.
Walking the grounds of this convention in Milwaukee, it's a little bit like visiting the land that time forgot. It has been 8 years since we saw an in-person convention take place here in the United States. And this one has got all the trappings associated with the razzmatazz of America's political gatherings.
This is an endeavor that's going to make America wealthy again.
On Monday, Jeff Kaufman, the chair of the Iowa Republicans, put Donald Trump's name forward as the party's nominee.
This is an endeavor to make America strong again. And say it with me, fellow Republicans, this is an endeavor to make America great again. So here we go. It is my honor to nominate Donald J. Trump for the office of President of the United States.
And that was just day one. But if this looks and sounds like Republican conventions of years past, with the Texas delegation all dressed up in cowboy hats, the West Virginian Republicans wearing coal miners' hats, and everyone else wearing Donald Trump's signature Make America Great Again hats, in fact, this is very much a Republican convention with a difference.
In 2020, I voted for Joe Biden. I'm sorry. He has made me regret it.
Linda Fornos is one of several speakers indicating the extent to which Donald Trump wants to use this convention to broaden the party's appeal. She's a legal immigrant. She's lived in the US for more than 20 years, building a business that has run into difficulty during the Biden administration. And she wants illegal immigrants blocked from entering America and challenging the livelihoods of people just like her.
This November, my vote won't be taken for granted. Please join me in voting for Donald J. Trump.
For the first time in history, the Republicans here have waded deep into traditional Democrat territory. Sean O'Brien became the first president of the Teamsters, one of the largest trade unions in the country ever to address a Republican convention, and argued there is nothing incompatible between Donald Trump's economic vision and the union's aim to protect the livelihood of its members.
We are not beholden to anyone or any party. We will create an agenda and work with a bipartisan coalition ready to accomplish something real for the American worker. And I don't care about getting criticized. It's an honor to be the first Teamster in our 121-year history to address the Republican National Convention.
And the party is making a pitch for African American votes as well. Amber Rose is a model, rapper and TV personality who told the convention her family had told her to hate Donald Trump, but then she did her own research into him.
I realized realize Donald Trump and his supporters don't care if you're black, white, gay, or straight. It's all love. And that's when it hit me. These are my people. This is where I belong.
Amber Rose, I didn't even know who she was. I mean, I'm a 62-year-old grandmother. I mean, I don't have Amber Rose on my radar.
Diana Abiasi is a delegate to the convention from San Antonio in Texas. Like many here, she is embracing the party's move to secure support from communities that have traditionally eschewed it.
I loved what she had to say last night. She said, I woke up. Good for her. God bless her. And then same thing with the Teamster. What an amazing speech that man gave. And you know what? It boils down to this party cares for the American worker. Is the economy set on a path to help the American worker? Is the economy set to help the American family? Can people get jobs? Are we putting Americans first in our job? In our jobs? That's what that's about. He was amazing, and good for him because he put America first.
Now, this is extraordinary stuff coming from the party that Ronald Reagan used to lead. As president in 1981, he smashed the country's union of air traffic controllers, firing all of them rather than meeting their demands for higher salaries and improved benefits. And the presence of some of these unusual speakers in prime time at a Republican convention suggests they may want to position themselves for the party's possible victory in November.
I view this as just a razor-thin, close election. We've got to approach it that way.
Senator Ron Johnson, a close Trump ally from Wisconsin, where this convention is taking place, is one Republican leader urging the party not to be complacent. But he also recognizes Republicans are unifying around Donald Trump, especially in the aftermath of the attempted assassination of the former president in Pennsylvania last weekend.
Well, I think we came to the convention pretty well unified, or coming into it. I think what happened Saturday just completely unifies the Republican Party. And for my part, I'm glad to hear President Trump changing his speech with the primary goal now, I think, of his presidency will be to unify and heal this nation. We've got a lot of problems to fix, a lot of damage to repair from Democrat governance, and we've got to do that, secure the border, make sure that the dollar remains more stable, utilize our God-given energy resources, try and stop all these endless wars. We need to unify and heal this nation. It sounds like that's exactly what President Trump wants to relay in his convention speech on Thursday.
There are big issues that are not on the agenda here this week. There's been nary a mention of climate change at the convention. Speakers claiming the 2020 election was stolen have been buried in hours when the convention is not live on the country's major TV networks. And as for Donald Trump's criminal convictions, they're not a talking point, but a selling point. T-shirts emblazoned with the slogan, "I'm voting for the felon," are selling like hotcakes. Diana Abiasi says she will be returning to Texas inspired. How confident are you of victory for the Republicans in November?
Boy, I don't want to say I'm confident because I want to work like quadruple time to make sure. In fact, I give currently about 40 hours a week to Republican policies and causes, and I'm going to double down. I am going to double down. I will take nothing for granted.
At the convention last night, Jeff Van Drew, a former Democrat, now a Republican congressman from New Jersey, was on hand to fire up the crowd.
Now I have a question for you. Will we win in November? Will we win in November? God bless you. God bless Donald Trump. And God bless the greatest country that ever existed on the face of the earth, the United States of America.
For Monocle Radio, I'm Simon Marks at the Republican Convention in Milwaukee.
Simon, thank you. Still to come on the programme, we sit down with Brazil's culture minister, Margareth Menezes.
Eu me sinto muito bem fazendo esse trabalho.
I feel very good doing this work in the Ministry of Culture. I think my 36-year experience as a singer in Brazil and outside Brazil helped me to have a good relationship with the cultural sector.
This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
Contact us at ubs.com.
This is The Globalist. It's 7:19 here in London, and I am joined in the studio by Xing Singh, who is a journalist and the host of Good Bad Billionaire on BBC Sounds. Xing Singh, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are going to start with Andrew Tate. Now, he's described as a controversial influencer. What exactly is an Andrew Tate?
So Andrew Tate is probably one of the most famous, I guess you could call them, thought leaders in the manosphere, which is what is the name for an online men's rights movement. It's basically a hotbed of toxic misogyny. It's very influential among young men and boys, particularly on the internet.
And, of course, he has been arrested, he's been charged, all sorts of news coming out about him. But he's based in Romania, and that's the latest line to come out of here. They've reimposed a travel ban on him.
Yes, so him and his brother Tristan have been charged with human trafficking, rape, and forming a criminal gang to sexually exploit women. And he's actually American and British, but he moved to Romania, where he claims to have made millions running an adult webcam business. And obviously the Romanian authorities feel very differently. He was charged with all these crimes. The Bucharest Court of Appeal has actually ruled that they cannot leave Romania as long as... an earlier court in Romania ruled that they could leave Romania as long as they stayed within the EU while this case was ongoing. But prosecutors appealed to the Bucharest Court of Appeal, and they've now said that they cannot leave the country.
So he has something like 9.7 million followers on social media?
Yes, so he's hugely influential. He has been kicked off various social media platforms at one time or another for saying things like women bear responsibility for sexual assault. He's actually described himself openly as a misogynist, but he still continues to wield an enormous amount of influence on platforms like X today.
I mean, it's extraordinary. A lot of the women actually backed him up and said that they were doing this completely willingly.
Yes, and I think that is one of the things that the prosecutors will have to prove. The case for the date for the trial actually hasn't been set yet. Tate denies all of the allegations, and so do him and his brother. He is still, unfortunately, very influential within that space. And if you are on TikTok or if you have a young son, for instance, it's more than likely that you'll have seen his videos circulating.
Quite extraordinary. Let's whiz over to North Korea now, or at least to the south, where a northern diplomat has gone.
Yes, so South Korea's top spy agency, the National Intelligence Service, has now confirmed that a high-profile North Korean diplomat who was stationed in Cuba has now defected to the south and is actually thought to be one of the highest-ranking North Korean diplomats to defect since 2016.
And, I mean, details from defections often take months to come out. How do we know about this?
Yeah, so we know about this because, and the reason why defections take a while to kind of trickle through the news is because because all defectors are expected to take a course on integrating into South Korean society after they defect. So really the government only releases details of their defections after that is completed.
What did he say about the attitude of North Koreans generally?
So he said he said to South Korean news that every North Korean thinks at least once about living in South Korea. And he's also said that, quote, disillusionment with the North Korean regime and a bleak future were the reasons why he defected.
What is the general fate of defectors? Because we often read very tragic stories about them not managing to integrate into a more Western-style democracy.
Yes, so the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has actually tried to improve the circumstances for North Korean defectors. Actually, Sunday was South Korea's first North Korean Defectors Day ceremony, and he's actually promised better financial support for defectors as well as tax incentives for companies hiring them in a speech he made on the day.
Let's go to Thailand now. Very, very mysterious case coming out of Bangkok.
Yes, so this is an extraordinary report and a story that is very much still developing. So 6 people have died in a luxury hotel suite in Thailand. Recently, police now say that they were poisoned by drinks laced with cyanide. The suspicion is that one of the dead was behind the poisoning, and it was driven by crushing debt. So the 6 deceased were found dead by housekeepers at the Grand Hyatt Erawan Hotel in the Thai capital of Bangkok late on Tuesday.
So, but the police are looking for one more person that they think might be involved.
Yes, and it's become clear that 2 of the 6 had actually loaned tens of millions of Thai baht to another one of the deceased for investment purposes, and that's worth nearly $280,000.
Right. They were Vietnamese nationals, or at least with Vietnamese origin. 2 of them were US citizens.
Yeah, 2 of the victims, Shireen Chong and Dang Hong Van, are actually American citizens. The other 4 dead are Vietnamese nationals.
Extraordinary story that we'll be following, I'm sure. Now, here's a story that everybody's been following. And why are we talking about this wedding, the Ambani wedding that took place in India this weekend, quite so much?
Well, it has been called India's wedding of the year. It's probably the wedding of the century from the way it's unfolded, because it's been estimated that millions and millions have been spent on this wedding between the billionaire heir, Anand Ambani, who married his longtime girlfriend Radhika Merchant in Mumbai. The wedding lasted 3 days, but that's not if you include these extraordinary pre-wedding celebrations which attracted people like Jeff Bezos and Rihanna.
And Tony and Cherie Blair were there too.
Yes.
So much coverage about this, but also a lot of attacks about conspicuous consumption.
Exactly. And I think one of the issues is that, as one comedian and social media critic, Shamita Yadav, said, shame on people celebrating income inequality in a country where we need wealth redistribution. Obviously, India, in many parts of the world, in many parts of the country, is still underdeveloped. And the idea that the world's most populous nation with 1.4 billion people is still kind of seeing this kind of opulence in show with such a glaring wealth gap is really kind of sticking in the craw of very many commentators.
Zing Zing, thank you very much indeed. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Israeli forces battled Hamas-led fighters in several parts of the Gaza Strip on Tuesday, and Palestinian health officials said at least 57 people were killed in Israeli bombardments of southern and central areas. Hamas has accused Israel of stepping up attacks in Gaza to try and derail efforts by Arab mediators and the United States to reach a ceasefire deal. Israel says it's trying to root out Hamas fighters. China and Russia have begun live-fire naval exercises in the South China Sea, according to a state-controlled newspaper, with the 2 countries having strengthened military and trade ties in recent years, following US sanctions on both. The countries will deploy at least 3 vessels each for the 3-day exercises. The drills follow the completion of a separate joint naval patrol in the North Pacific. And Thai police are investigating the deaths of 6 foreign nationals, whose bodies were found in a room at an upmarket hotel in Bangkok on Tuesday, including looking for a 7th person in connection with the incident. The group, 3 men and 3 women who were of Vietnamese descent, checked into different rooms, but their bodies were found in one room which did not show any sign of struggle. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. The centrist French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal and his government resigned on Tuesday, but they'll stay on in a caretaker capacity until a new cabinet is appointed following the snap election. But that looks to be some time away. The left scored a surprise victory in the poll, but the hastily put-together coalition cannot agree on a leader, and negotiations between Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party, the Greens, the Socialists and the Communists seem to be at a standstill. Well, I'm joined now from Paris by political analyst Florence Biederman. Florence, welcome back to the show. I wonder if you could start by telling us about the new Popular Front, which is this leftist alliance, and how it came together.
Well, it came together because of the threat of a victory of the far right. Those 2 parties, the socialists, the main 2 parties, the socialists and France and Baud, the far left party, have been actually arguing against each other during the European elections. So when the dissolution of the Assembly was pronounced by Macron, which was a surprise for everybody, then I think their first reaction was to say whatever our differences are, let's put them aside, because a victory of the far right and the far right coming to power and governing the country is the greatest danger. So surprisingly, quickly, they made this alliance. they put forward a kind of common program with main points, and it took them 2-3 days, which was a surprise. I think probably maybe even for President Emmanuel Macron. I don't think he took that into account into his calculation. So this alliance since then, has been arguing now around the name for prime minister, which just means, it's such an incredible show to look at. Like, they have been exchanging names. The socialists suggested one name. It was refused by the far left. The far left suggested my name. It was different. So all in all, 10 days after the election, they cannot even agree on a name on who could be a prime minister, because this is eventually also the decision of Emmanuel Macron to accept their choice or not.
I wonder if they had any sort of plan for a name before the vote happened, if they decided on who would lead, or indeed if they had any expectation that they would need a plan.
Well, I think it was a surprise for everybody, including them, that they came first. This is one point. What was there was no special expectation, but it was kind of a good surprise to them. And obviously, if they cannot agree after 10 days, they didn't have a name. Like it's this is for sure.
Yeah, let's talk about the sticking points and how negotiations have unfolded. Who's been suggested?
Well, it's kind of personalities that are not that famous. You would have heard of them if you follow French political life. But France Unbowed, like the far left, supported, they say, by the Greens and the Communists, suggested a woman who is an MP from La Réunion. So she's a black woman, Huguette Bello. She is close to Mélenchon's party. She could be kind of a consensus figure, but honestly, it's not that she's very famous. So the socialists refused, and then themselves they put forward Laurence Toubiana, who also is a woman who played a role in French politics, but I would say not in the first rank. So that would be kind of possible compromise candidates. But again, nobody cares in both parties. Whoever is the personality, the answer has always been no. So they were supposed to give a name already a week ago, and it seems that it can drag on and on.
So what happens if they fail to choose a leader?
Well, eventually, you can hope they will. But whatever, if they don't suggest any name, then Emmanuel Macron, it makes the job easier for Emmanuel Macron. He is supposed, as the president, to choose a name amongst the party that came first, but it's not decided by the constitution, It's kind of what happens normally in French political life. But he can very well, in any case, decide to choose someone else. And I guess, Macron has been thinking about this for a while. So until after the Olympic Games, I think we won't know, because obviously this caretaker government led by Gabriel Attal will go on after the Games. Attal himself says he doesn't want to be prime minister again. So let's see what happens. It's in the hands of Emmanuel Macron eventually.
But on Thursday, that the newly elected lawmakers kick off the legislature, then the first point of order on the agenda is electing the president of the National Assembly. So how does the process work?
So the process works is each group has to present a candidate. And by the way, this is also another question for the Alliance of the Left. Who are they going to present? But you can hope they will find an agreement at least on this point. And then there is a vote, and the one with more votes is elected. So it's, again, also something that, considering the assembly is kind of divided into three main blocks, like the left and far left, the center, and the far right. So it's also a question of who will be able, to put more votes on his name. So on Macron's party's side, it seems that Yael Braun-Pivet, who was Speaker of the Parliament till now, will be a candidate, and maybe she can get more votes. Who knows? It's completely uncertain considering the composition of the assembly.
And what's the precedent in terms of caretaker governments? How long can it stay in place?
Well, weeks and maybe months. There is not really, a precise timing. It's kind of uncharted territory for France. The whole situation, we haven't seen that before. There was twice a situation of cohabitation with a prime minister not belonging to the party of the president. But even in those situations, it was clear at the time there were two main blocs. So now there are three blocs, so nobody knows what will happen. And this caretaker government could, in theory, go on for months, but politically, of course, Macron will have to take a decision before months. He will have to take into account the result of the legislative elections. He cannot say, let's go on with Gabriel Attal forever as before.
And I mean, of course, the international spotlight is about to fall on France as it hosts the Olympics. So how is this going to play out when France is really being scrutinised by the world?
Well, it will be kind of a parenthesis, I mean, Attal staying as a caretaker, as head of the caretaker government, it will be like business as usual, at least at the surface. So he will be the prime minister you will see around during the games. Gérald Darmanin, who is a home affairs minister and who played a very important role to organize the whole security of the games, will still be in charge. The mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, didn't change. She's still the mayor, so she will be there. So there will be kind, of suspense, but over the surface, everything will be just like normal and fine until the end of the game. And of course, then the political game start again.
But I mean, the caretaker government can't actually make any decisions. They can't enact any laws, can they? I mean, it seems to me really quite a precarious situation to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. It cannot take, but again, also it's not constitutional. It's kind of a habit. It's how it worked before, but it cannot take like important decision. It cannot, it could not make a big reform on this or that. Like, for example, there is Macron's government was going to adopt a law like changing the unemployment subsidies, but it stopped it. So. Probably it won't put it again before the National Assembly. But like if there is kind of an exceptional situation, let's say a serious national security risk, then this government could make decisions still. It's not powerless, but it is kind of, let's say, a transition government, and as such, it's just managing current affairs without any dramatic or big decision.
Florence, thank you very much indeed. That's Florence Biedermann there talking to us from Paris. You're with Monocle Radio.
Join Monocle every weekday and let the briefing guide and inspire you through uncertain times, always keeping you ahead of the curve. Hear razor-sharp insights and opinion from Monocle's bureau and correspondents, as well as a lineup of brilliant minds from around the world.
It's devolving to a point where we're at odds with each other instead of letting our political leaders do the dirty work, so to speak.
Heavyweight coverage, no white noise, and always delivered with a smile.
I think the grey areas lead to a lot of sort of awkward conversations, and there's nothing the English dislike more than awkward conversations.
Keep your appointment with The Briefing every weekday at 1300 CET, noon in London and 7 a.m. in New York City, here on Monocle Radio.
It's 7:38 in London, that's 8:38 in Zurich. Now, the King Charles, will deliver his traditional speech at the opening of the UK Parliament today. The occasion is always used as a means for the government to set out the legislative agenda. So what measures do the newly empowered Labour Party plan? Well, Vincent McAviney is a reporter and a regular Monocle commentator. Vinny, many thanks for being here. And of course, I know that UK politics are your beat. You've been following this fascinating roller coaster for weeks. You just before we came on air, you showed me a picture of Boris Johnson addressing the Republican
National Convention
in a describe
near
that.
empty room. And we know that Liz Truss is kicking about there, another former prime minister too. But they sort of think that they can go to the US and become sort of little stars like Nigel Farage is under Donald Trump. But there isn't that much interest in British prime ministers over there, to be honest.
Yeah, I must say, with all these pictures of Trump being depicted as some sort of messiah, to see Johnson speaking to an empty room gave me some cheer. Now, of course, we're talking about Johnson because this has been a rollercoaster that was really triggered by him and Brexit. But the Tories had been in power for 14 years, and it's 14 years that Labour have been waiting to kind of handle this King's Speech. So it's such a big moment for Sir Keir Starmer. Tell us more.
They haven't done one of these in 15 years since Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. Just to be fully clear, it's called the King's Speech, but it's written for him by Number 10 Downing Street. He just has to read. It's like an actor turning up to read a script. Now, what we will see today is a lot of pomp and pageantry. He'll be in a horse-drawn carriage, being taken from Buckingham Palace to Parliament, and there's a sort of ceremony with Black Rod, and all the British judges and all the lords are in their ermine. But what this essentially is the launch of Keir Starmer's entire programme of government. And he has said overnight that he's taking the brakes off of Britain. He's spent the first 12 days of his premiership actually away from the domestic policy agenda, pretty much out there on the international stage the full time. We saw him at NATO all last week, meeting with President Biden in the White House. He was in Germany over the weekend at the football. And this is someone who has campaigned very much on domestic priorities. That's what's got him into office. So we're going to see some 35 bills. This is a massive government agenda. All the things they'll be working on for at least the next 2 years until they have to do another King's Speech to bring in the sort of back end of the legislation for his time. He's got 5 years in power now, at least. With the majority that he's got, that massive landslide, he is likely to have at least 2 terms, so that is 10 years in power. So he is starting the triggering gun on all his priorities right now today.
And what can he learn from his predecessors? I mean, how did Blair and Mandelson and Campbell, basically, that whole previous lot of Labour, did they grab the opportunity?
No, they didn't. And they regret this. When you read their autobiographies, they've said this over the past decade. And they have all, I think, interestingly, been out on their podcast and in their interviews over the past 2 weeks saying, don't make our mistake. In that first Labour term, when they came in with a massive landslide between 1997 and 2001, they all feel that they were too cautious, that they didn't step out of opposition mode into governing mode and use that peak of popularity and power to really drive through the sort of radical change that they wanted to do. They did get a lot done. Independence of the Bank of England, they've, minimum wage. But what they think that Keir Starmer should do is be more ambitious now because it will pay dividends. And Keir Starmer is facing this criticism that he's only got this sort of, even though it's a massive majority, and in British politics, that means he can do effectively whatever he wants. He can revise, revoke, or introduce whatever legislation now pretty much without fearing any kind of loss in Parliament, which is not something we were used to over the last couple of years in British politics, where it's always been a knife-edge majority and prime ministers have struggled and had to compromise. He can do now what he wants. And so I think the older government voices from the last Labour government are saying, look, you've got in with this Mingval strategy. You've been so careful. Some have said not ambitious enough. You now have to prove yourself to voters and those who say this is, even though a big majority, it's sort of not a shallow majority because you haven't picked up a sort of huge popular landslide. You should be bold and bring the change you've promised because that will win you that second term for sure.
So it's 35 bills that they're expected to lay down today. And of course, chief amongst that is economic growth.
Yes. Now, the first bit of good news for Keir Starmer today, we've just had the latest UK monthly inflation figure. It has stayed down at 2%. So that is the only real bit of good inheritance he's got from Rishi Sunak, bringing that inflation down from 11% to 2%. The pressure will now be on the Bank of England to reduce the interest rate at their next meeting in August because we have huge problems with the mortgage system, with the property system, because rates are up at sort of around 6% or so at the moment. Now, what Keir Starmer wants to do is he is not going to introduce any new taxes, he says, on working people, which means he has a plan for growth for Britain. Everything that they're going to put forward today is all about what they're calling a decade of renewal. They're going to be bringing changes to the planning system to make it easier to build more houses. That's a key part of this. They want to do things like more green energy, so onshore wind farms once again. They're going to slowly, they've announced, bring back rail into public ownership. We've had this experiment for 40 years of privatized rail, of franchises that have not worked, and basically the whole system collapsed in the pandemic. So slowly they're going to bring back what they're calling Great British Railways, where they will buy back the rail and bus operations around the country to bring a proper system of public transport. There'll be a unified ticketing system across this with automatic refunds, we're told. This is a big, ambitious promise. And I think many people in this country, even the Conservatives effectively gave up on the idea of rail franchises that were private. Because what happened in this country was that foreign governments and their national rail operators were simply coming in and taking over these franchises, running them poorly and extracting the profits to then take back to other countries in Europe. So this is a big, ambitious plan that Keir Starmer is putting out today. And, if you've never seen it before, there is a bit of pomp and pageantry worth tuning in for too.
Absolutely. Vincent, thank you very much indeed. That's Vincent McAvenny, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk architecture with Tim Abrams, who's contributing editor to The Architectural Record. He joins us now from Oxford. Tim, we've just been talking about trains and public transport here in the UK. In Riyadh, we've seen a huge development. Tell us about what's been hailed as one of the greatest acts of civil engineering.
It's quite the difference between the issues that the UK face and what is happening in Saudi Arabia currently. The Riyadh Metro is due to open in December 2024, and we're getting to look at the stations that have been built. There's over 80 metro stations that have been built in 10 years in the city, 6 metro lines connecting the city together. Construction began in April 2014. 10 years later, they finished it. $22.5 billion have been spent. And one might argue it's very early days still, but the city is literally going to change overnight when the metro opens, going from a private car-oriented city to one with public, not just public transport, but public spaces around that. And the new stations are opening with it.
And Zaha Hadid Architects, the late Zaha Hadid's company, has been involved.
Yes. There are remarkably few prestige stations across the line. There's 84 metro stations, as I was saying, but there are only, say, 3 or 4 which are icons, architecturally challenging and dynamic. The building by her company, I should say, is in the King Abdullah Financial District, and this is amazing long sculpted dune-like structure, which the plan only allowed for a certain narrow site, but what's been created is this quite extravagant and one of the practice's best buildings, I would say, to have been completed in several years. Very exciting, but part of this huge and amazing 84 metro station system.
Let's talk about the Olympics, because everybody is. But I particularly want to know about the design of the torch.
Yes, the torch, the Olympic torch, is a fascinating insight into what we might be able to expect from the opening ceremony and from the event as a whole. Matteo Leonard, the designer, has unveiled his design for it, but it's this structure which looks like, if one could imagine a wine glass with a wine bottle stuck on the top. It clearly looks like 2 parts. And although it's been run through the country, across Europe, in fact, to the country, still with this structure intact, it looks as if there's going to be some kind of reveal when the Olympic ceremony, opening ceremony finally happens. The torch is brought into the Stade de France. And Lionel has also designed the cauldron. So there's clearly going to be some kind of reveal with these two elements of the torch and the and this specifically designed cauldron. So it's all to be looked out for.
There's only one real new venue, isn't there, for this Olympics?
There is. What is happening is, I mean, we're living in an age where particularly Western or European cities don't really have the space or the finances to build a whole new layer of infrastructure for the Olympic Games. And Paris is perhaps setting the tone for Olympic Games to come by only building one new Olympic stadium, Olympic venue, the Centre Aquatique Olympique, which is across the Stade de France, which won't even host the swimming, actually. That's going to be held in La Défense, but will host the diving and other aquatic sports. But it's a beautiful structure, gorgeous wooden roof, which is just absolutely sculptural, perfect, which will create this real sense of drama. But it is the only new structure. The Olympic venues, the Olympic housing for the athletes is new, but that has a kind of use beyond the Olympics, which will be turned into housing, social housing beyond it. So it's a very environmentally considerate one, which means that one of the exciting aspects of it is the way in which the French are going to be recasting and reframing different parts of the city, which they feel perhaps tourists don't normally come to. One of the most exciting elements is going to be seeing stadium like the Yves de Manoir Stadium, which was the place where Harold Abrahams and Eric Liddell ran the events portrayed in the Chariots of Fire, and that's being reused as a hockey stadium. La Défense is going to be used for the swimming. It's a rethinking and a recasting of Paris, which is always an exciting prospect.
Absolutely. We don't have very long, but I wonder if you could quickly tell me about the home of the Flemish artist Rubens.
This is a place to go to. They put this on your travel list. It's Antwerp. The new Peter Paul Rubens, his home has been redone by the local architect Robrecht and Dam. It's going to be absolutely beautiful.
He was a painter. He did altarpieces, portraits, landscapes, but he was also a prolific designer of tapestry workshops.
And he was also a diplomat. So this home that used to sit at the heart of Antwerp was this cultural and political centre. So the way in which it's being recast as this centre of the city is really exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing it very much. I'm off there next week.
Oh, that sounds absolutely wonderful. It's got a cafe, a multimedia experience centre. That doesn't sound very Rubenesque somehow.
Well, the fact that we have a modern Antwerp-based architect rethinking it is really important, I think. The way in which he has become a kind of cultural icon for the city, the way in which the library is being introduced there to, support Antwerp as a cultural centre, I think is really good. It's also, I love the way that Belgium is a kind of mix of architectural styles, so they can accept something that's hyper-modern next to something that's Baroque and in the Flemish tradition.
Tim, have lots of fun when you go there. I envy you. That is Tim Abrams there talking to us from Oxford. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. And finally today we head to Brazil to know more about Brazil's culture minister, music legend Margareth Menezes. During the ministerial break, Menezes is setting up for her European tour, starting at the end of this week in Ljubljana. Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco spoke with the minister and reminded us about her biggest hits too.
It seems that it is a bit of a tradition to have a music legend as the culture minister in Brazil. We did it back in 2003 when President Lula appointed celebrated singer Gilberto Gil as the minister. And now, since Lula's return to power, the new culture minister is one of the most iconic voices from the country, the Bahian singer Margareth Menezes, known for hits such as Faraó. Menezes hails from the city of Salvador, in the state of Bahia, a state known for its incredible cultural output.
What
happened in Brazil when the African, indigenous and European cultures got mixed, it was very potent in Bahia, the state I am from.
This potent mix, as described by Menezes, is seen very clearly in the state today.
This is expressed in Brazilian contemporary culture today, this big mix, very rhythmic, melodic. That's what we find in Bahia.
When asked by Monocle how does it feel to be culture minister after so many years as a singer, here is what Margareth told us.
I feel very good doing this work in the Ministry of Culture. I think my 36-year experience as a singer in Brazil and outside Brazil helped me to have a good relationship with the cultural sector.
And during the July break as a minister, Margareth is getting ready for her European tour that would take her to places such as Ljubljana to Amsterdam, with a date in London too, at the Barbican on Friday the 26th of July. For the tour, she'll be joined by the groundbreaking Ilê Aie, the first Afro-Bloco movement in Brazil, founded in 1974.
Dos blocos afros, e aí eu falando do Ilê Aie porque foi o primeiro bloco afro.
Ilê Aie was the first Afro bloc. It was the first to defend Afro-Brazilian culture, the fight against racism, doing this in the carnival celebrations. Ilê inspired many other carnival blocs.
Malê de balé, Muzenza, Cortejo Afro é mais novo.
And of course, Margareth will play some of her biggest hits, including the thrilling Dandalunda.
E essa música revolucionou por isso.
Dandalunda was revolutionary. Besides its incredible sound, the producer, Carlinhos Brown, added Arabic castanets, creating a unique sound.
De ferro, fazendo aquele som incrível.
In many ways, being a minister comes very naturally for someone that has been representing Brazilian music in the last decades. I'll definitely be there at the Barbican to watch her. It's not every country in the world with a literal pop star as a minister. See you in London, Margareth. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers, and I hope to see you in my show.
Com certeza.
Many thanks there to Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco, who was speaking with Brazil's culture minister, Margareth Menezes. And a reminder that Margareth and Ilê Aie will perform at London's Barbican on Friday, the 26th of July. And that's all for today's programme. Many thanks to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Carlotta Rebello and Christy O'Grady. Our researcher was Sana Jamanji and our studio manager was Lily Austin. Now, after the headlines, there's more music on the way. I will be with you for the Continental Shift, playing you lots of tracks from our global playlist, mostly actually chosen by Fernando, who we've just heard from. And then the briefing is at midday in London with Guy Delaunay. I'm Georgina Godwin. I'll be back with you tomorrow. Thanks for listening.